What do we mean? What are we talking about when we talk about meaning? What do we mean by meaning? It's a bit of an annoying question already. I know. But it's also interesting. So, semantically, what we're trying to communicate often when we're talking about meaning is that something bears a certain degree of significance. So, when we talk about having a meaningful life or a meaningful relationship or a meaningful experience, what we're saying is that it's a significant thing. It is a thing that carries a certain kind of weight, that it matters. And often the idea that something matters is contingent upon storytelling. It's contingent upon having a narrative structure that supports that sense. So to illustrate this with a concrete example, there are certain kinds of meanings that if we get rid of the narrative structure, the storytelling piece of it that we have in our heads, the meaning can be fundamentally altered. The significance can be fundamentally altered, and it can even disappear in some cases. So it's like there are meanings where if you get rid of the story, the meaning ceases to exist. So that's a different kind of meaning than a meaning that is inherent, that is like there fundamentally. So to illustrate this, if you've played the game Clue, you might recognize having a wrench. So, like, on one hand, this wrench, you're like, why does this man have such a, a large wrench? Well, sometimes you have to wrench really big shit. I don't know. I don't even remember why I got this, but it's hilarious. It's a hilariously large wrench for a non plumber to own. That's a tangent. But what I'm saying is, we could tell ourselves a story about this item, and we could say, this is a wrench. It's a tool for loosening and tightening things, for pipe fitting. On the other hand, if you've played the game Clue, you know that this wrench could also be potentially viewed as a murder weapon. Well, in a world, or in a view of the world where we believe this to have been an object that was used to murder somebody, it carries a different kind of significance and a different kind of meaning than in a world where it's just simply a tool for, tightening and loosening pipes. So that's like one concrete example that kind of simplifies what I'm talking about. But you could apply that to things like relationships. You could apply that to things like core beliefs that we hold or values that we hold. Many of those things only carry the weight that they carry because of the story that we tell ourselves. And I think even just saying those words can cause people to bristle because we identify very strongly with some of the things that we believe. And especially when we talk about this act of creating meaning in our lives, what we find to be meaningful, if we realize that it has to do with storytelling and that in the absence of telling ourselves those stories, meanings have a tendency to change, shift, or disappear, that can be an unsettling experience because it causes us to reconsider things. Like the brain fundamentally doesn't want to work that hard. Like we want to have a mental model that works to get our needs met. And once we have that in place, messing with it doesn't really make sense. It's not adaptive. It's not a good use of time and energy. It creates extra work. So that's, part of the reason why people don't think about these things. Why am I talking about them? What's the value then? If like having a simple mental model that does a job of allowing us to thrive in whatever ways we want is sufficient for most people, then why bother thinking about what is the meaning of meaning and what is this activity of making meaning? I think another, and I'll answer that in just a second, but before I do, another piece to this is that when we start to like pick apart meaning, especially meaning that is narrative based, that is created by thoughts, created by abstractions, by like these mental models that we create, or codified beliefs, one of the unsettling pieces of that is that there's a sense that without those structures, without those linguistic and abstract mental models of the world, we would descend into something similar to nihilism or like utter meaninglessness. And that carries a negative connotation for people. But I think that is a fear. There's some truth to that fear, because if your deeply held values and beliefs are challenged and you lose a connection to those stories that you told yourself to feel meaning and significance in your life, it can send you on a somewhat frightening journey of sort of soul searching of like, what is the point of all this? What is the point of my suffering? What is the point of, the hardships that life is filled with? And also, how do I get my needs met in a new world where I don't have the comforting illusions that I once had, or the comforting stories and purpose that those stories gave me? And those fears are legitimate, to a certain degree. So, but what I want to invite you to think about is that there's a different way of understanding what meaning is, and that I would actually challenge you to ask yourself this question: that if if a given meaning in my life only exists by virtue of storytelling, by virtue of narrative, ask yourself, is that meaning necessary, and is it real? But in order to really do that, you have to have an alternate model, right? Because the fear of nihilism, the fear of meaninglessness, is a legitimate fear, as we said. So if we want to like transcend the need for storytelling and to find a deeper meaning, like, first you can ask the question, is there a deeper meaning? And I think for me, the answer is fundamentally yes. I think the way that I like to view meaning, and this is what I'm challenging you to like reflect on, is that there is an inherent meaning to things. So that if you can follow a train of thought where you think about quieting the mind, where you think about turning off the part of your thinking that is linguistic, that is based in language, or that is based in symbol, or that is based in narrative. If you can turn that off, which is it's quite challenging for some people, and I think it's a skill that you can build, that you can. I think that's one of the primary goals of meditation and mindfulness. One of the primary advantages of psychedelic drug is one of the primary advantages of intense physical activity is that you can shut off the symbolic reasoning aspect of the mind, and that you can be in more of an experiential kind of state where it's just calm, direct experience, or intense direct experience in some cases. So the question is, get rid of the meaning that exists in language, and then what is left? So let's look at some examples of that, similar to the wrench, or we can even look at the wrench again. It's like, when we don't tell ourselves this is a tool, when we don't tell ourselves this is a murder weapon, it still exists. Nonetheless, it has some inherent meaning to it. It has some inherent meaning if we don't even, like, if you were an alien and you didn't have pipes and you didn't have anything that you ever used wrenches on, and you just looked at this object with totally fresh eyes. Now, you might begin to start telling yourself a new story about what this means. But the question is, does it have a meaning before we start this act of storytelling? A better example might be to ask yourself that same question about something like a geographic feature, like a mountain range, for example. Is there a meaning to a mountain range that is inherent in the existence of that mountain range? Similarly, is there a meaning to the ocean or the moon or a sunset that is disconnected from any human activity of storytelling or of narrative or of ascribing significance to it? And I would argue that that is a gateway to understanding what meaning actually is. It's the ultimate antidote against nihilism is to see that outside of the constructs of human thought, there is a fundamental significance to existence itself. Existence is the key word. It's about being, right? So the mountain, from one perspective, has a deep significance that has to do with its very existence. So, like, you could look at it. I could tell a story about that, right? I could say there's a narrative there where it's like the mountain range kind of controls the weather. It, like, the clouds form around it, water falls. It's like sort of the keystone to the watershed and feeds all the animals and plants in its biome. So it's like there I started to create a narrative around why the mountain has significance. And yet that significance exists before I told the story, right? So the it exists by virtue of its existence alone. Like, existence alone is meaningful. So, like, this is an interesting one because, like, if you get rid of, it's like it allows you to let go of all of your narrative structures, all of your storytelling, all of your, like, whys and why nots, and to just get into this, like, deeper sense of, like, a silent kind of understanding of what meaning is, a silent kind of acceptance of what life is. And it's truly freeing and profound. And then you realize that, like, all of the complex storytelling that we have is non-essential. It is actually non-essential. Now, it's essential for certain things. Like, without certain stories, we would probably take different actions. So this is the part that's unsettling. And it's a radical stance because so much of human organization and labor and morality is governed by storytelling, by narrative structure. It tells us how to live, how to be. And if we start to question it, we might make different choices about how to live, how to be. But so here's the thing, though. Like, just like all the other species on the earth, we actually can let go of that anxiety because inherent in us is a kind of instinctive and intuitive understanding of what we need as humans, just the same way that an ant has an intuitive and inherent understanding of how to be an ant. We have the same thing as humans. The so much of the anxiety that we create in our lives to do whatever, to get ahead, to get status, to get validation, to get security, to get safety, is unnecessary. We can let go of a lot of it. Now, I'm not saying that those things are unnecessary. We do need status. We do need validation. We do need safety. We do need security. We do need resources. And it is a world of survival. It is a world of competition. And it is a world of zero sum games. There are things that we can do in abundance, and there are a lot of things that are not in abundance. Like, the universe is fundamentally one of resource competition. That's just part of being an animal. It's part of being a living creature that has to kill other living things to survive, whether they're plants or animals. Like, life feeds on life. It is a both a tremendously beautiful but also, like, horrifying universe. And I think holding both of those thoughts together and not letting one or the other side of it dominate our thinking is really where the juice is. So anyway, that's a lot, but to summarize, I think understanding meaning through this lens, that there's meaning that we ascribe through language and symbol, and then there's meaning that is inherent. And the meaning that is inherent is there regardless of what we say. It's there regardless of our existence. It's inherent to the existence of the thing. And that is the most fundamental kind of meaning that is unassailable, and it is not subject to debate. It is it's it's like a deeper thing. It is existence itself. Existence itself is a kind of meaning. And to really tie that up, why is that the case? It's because nothing is disconnected from anything else, right? There's like a matter and energy is constantly reforming from one thing to another, over a long enough time scale. Everything is recombining, everything is like building up and falling apart. Mountains are built and they erode. Humans are born and they die. It's a constantly shifting sea of form. And because of that, every single thing that occurs is fundamentally connected to every other thing. It is all fundamentally one. There's a perspective from which you can imagine the perspective of the totality of the, like, imagine yourself in that place of, like, not just being a human being, but being a piece of the whole, being a piece of the entire cosmos, the entire universe or universes or whatever you want to call it, like the highest place. And then also imagine that, expand that to not just a moment in time, but expand that to all time. Think about the entirety of all time and all existence, right? Whatever. Peace.